I want to continue this morning talking about anxiety. And if you remember last time, toward the end of the sermon, we got into the subject of anxiety, and I defined some of those words for you. And I talked about how anxiety, the word, is not actually found in the King James Bible. Interestingly enough, it is found in some of the other modern versions. I didn't go looking for it, but I got a book on anxiety, and inside the cover of it, he had a Bible verse quoted from the Proverbs, and I forget, it was 12:25, which says that heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad, and that version rendered heaviness as anxiety, and I thought, I wonder if that's a synonym of anxiety, and I didn't think it was, and it's not. So go figure, they translated it incorrectly. So anyway, the point is, in the King James, the word's not used, anxiety that is, but as I said, there are a number of synonyms of it. And last time we looked at one of them, and that was carefulness, or careful. And this time we want to look at a couple of more, though we won't even come close to finishing the second one. But the first one is the word care, which is, a derivative of careful, a cognate of it, I guess you could say. And the Bible does use this word to refer to anxiety in a number of places. If you want to turn to Ezekiel chapter 4, and verse 16 is the first place. Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 16. Now, the Lord had told Ezekiel in this chapter that he was to lie on his left side for, I think it was 390 days, and he was to lie on his right side for 40 days. And this would be symbolic of the number of years that Israel would be suffering under God's wrath and judgment. And then he told him to take unto him some of these different type of grains and make bread. And he was to bake this bread out of the dung that cometh out of a man, as he tells him. In verse 9, he tells him about this bread. Have you ever heard of Ezekiel 4:9 bread? Or Ezekiel bread? Like the full title is Ezekiel 4:9 bread. Comes in a green bag. Some of the best bread in the world, if you ask me. It's some of the worst bread in the world if you ask people that like normal bread. But if you like hearty, real substantive bread, especially as toast. I don't like it on sandwiches, but anyway. But I love that bread. And I remember one time years ago, somebody had pointed out this verse to me when I was first being converted. This is before I was probably even baptized. And I just thought this was such an interesting passage. So I went to this health food store or something, and I was buying Ezekiel bread. And I asked the lady, I said, well, was this bread cooked over the dung of a man or the dung of a cow? And she looked at me like I was crazy. But I will explain to you why I asked that question. Anyway, so Ezekiel, it says here in verse 9, I'm just going on just a little rabbit trail. Take thou also unto the wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and fitches, and put them in one vessel, and make the bread thereof according to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon thy side. 390 days shalt thou eat thereof. And thy meat which thou shalt eat shall be by weight 20 shekels a day. From time to time shalt thou eat it. So that's the ingredients of the Ezekiel 4:9 bread there. And he was to eat that for 390 days, measured out to him, just a certain amount. Thou shalt drink also water by measure, the 1/6 part of an hin. From time to time shalt thou drink. So he's going to be eating this bread, measured out, just a little bit of bread, a little bit of water, for a long time. Like he's over a year. He's going to be suffering as a picture of what Israel's going to suffer. Ezekiel's doing it because the Lord told him to. Israel's going to do it out of necessity. And verse 12, and thou shalt eat it as barley cakes, and thou shalt bake it with dung that cometh out of a man in their sight. So imagine baking this bread with dung that comes out of a man, like dried human poop. I mean, imagine how nasty that would be. Ezekiel thought the exact same thing that you're thinking. Verse 13, and the Lord said, even thus shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles, whither I will drive them. So this is what they were going to end up doing. And here Ezekiel thinks just like we do. Then said I, Ah, Lord God, behold, my soul hath not been polluted, for from my youth even, or up even until, let me get that right. For from my youth up even till now have I not eaten of that which dieth of itself, or is torn in pieces, neither came there abominable flesh into my mouth. Then he said unto me, Lo, I have given thee cow's dung for man's dung, that thou shalt prepare thy bread therewith. So the Lord gave him something a little better. You can cook your bread over cow crap instead of human crap. Right? Now, that still sounds pretty bad, but it's better than human feces, isn't it? This is why I asked the lady at the store about how the bread was cooked, and she wasn't sure. I imagine they probably modified the recipe just slightly, at least the cooking part of it. I don't think Ezekiel 4:9 Company probably uses either of those two cooking fuels. But here's verse 16. This is what we want to get to. And now you have the context of what he's saying here. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, behold, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem. In other words, he's going to cause a famine. That's what that phrase, break the staff of bread, means. And they shall eat bread by weight and with care. And they shall drink water by measure and with astonishment, that they may want bread and water, like they're going to lack it, in other words, and be astonished one with another and consume away for their iniquity. So this is what Israel was going to have to do. And now do you understand, when he says they will eat it with care, do you kind of get the weight of what care is? Imagine being in that circumstance and eating bread like that, measured out by weight. You barely have enough to keep you alive. You barely have enough water. You're in a state of quasi-starvation while you're under God's wrath. And that's what it is to eat with care, right? So now you kind of get an idea of how the Bible uses the word care. Care is mental suffering, sorrow, grief, trouble. It's burdened state of mind arising from fear, doubt, or concern about anything, solicitude, anxiety, mental perturbation. Also, in the plural, it's anxieties or solicitudes, like if it was used in cares instead of care. So here we have a synonym of anxiety. And you can imagine if you were in that state and your city was besieged and there was a famine and you barely had enough food to keep you alive, you'd probably be in a state of anxiety, fear, doubt, grief, trouble, right? So that's what care means. We don't use it in that way today, but that's how the Bible uses it in some places. In some places it also refers to just being, thoughtful and concerned about something, like cast your cares upon God. That's our anxieties, for he careth for you. He's not having an anxiety attack when you give your cares to him. He's concerned about you and he's thinking about you and taking care of you. So anyway, we'll get to that verse here in a minute. But before we go there, let's turn to Matthew 13 and verse 22. Matthew 13, 22. This is the parable of the sower, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And this would be the second type of soil. I believe it was the second soil. This is the third type of soil. I think it was the third type of soil. And in verse 22, he says, He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. Now, I recognize there that the care of this world wouldn't have to be limited to anxiety and fears, right? It could just be all the concerns of this world, and all the things that you have to do, and all the things that strive for your time. But I'm going to make a little case here that those things, like those cares, all the things you have to take care of, all the things you have to be concerned with, and all the things that are vying for your time, those cares cause care in the sense of anxiety. So all those things that you have to do, or that you don't have to do, but the things that you have imposed upon yourself to do, because there's very few things that we actually have to do. Most of the things we suffer with are self-inflicted. All those things that we pile into our lives, all those cares, cause care. In Mark 4:19, which is a parallel passage, instead of in the singular, where it says the care of this world, in Mark chapter 4, verse 19, he says cares. And the cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lust of other things, entering in choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful. So this is one of the reasons why, when some people hear the gospel, and some people hear it and they just brush it off and they don't care. That's the ones where the bird, the stony ground where the bird picked up the seed. Others hear it and it sounds good to them right away. Something in it, just resonates with them for a moment, and they get real excited about it. They might even get baptized and join the church and be, very zealous. And then it just kind of peters out. They've got no root in themselves. They're off onto the next thing. They've found another religion or something else that got them interested, and then they're off. And then you have this third group, the thorns. And they grow up, but then the cares of this world end up choking out the world. The word. They've got too many other things vying for their time, and that ends up making them unfruitful. Of course, reading and studying the Bible is difficult when a man is filled with anxiety, right? So if you have a bunch of cares that are causing care in your life, it's pretty hard to read and study the Bible, which is why you become unfruitful, right? And why do you think that Satan wants us filled with fear and anxiety? Because if you're filled with fear and anxiety, how much good Bible reading or Bible study are you doing, right? Probably not a whole lot. Your mind is so distracted with everything else that you can't focus on the things of God. And that's right where Satan wants us. Now, it's interesting that the care of this world in this verse is linked with the deceitfulness of riches. There in Matthew 13:22. The care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word. Now, these two things are connected together. Care, anxiety, and the deceitfulness of riches. Because the cares of this world cause anxiety, and a lot of what our cares are focused around is the deceitfulness of riches. We want money, and we want the things that money can buy, and therefore we end up working when we shouldn't, or working more than we should, putting in way more hours than we should, maybe working a job that's way too stressful for us, way too demanding, but it's because of the care of this world. We want the money, we want the things that money can buy, we want to enjoy ourselves, we want to go on vacations, we want the big house, we want the big cars, we want all this stuff, and so we have all this pressure on ourselves to work so hard to provide all this stuff that we really don't need, which ends up causing anxiety in our lives. I just finished reading a second book on anxiety. It's called Redefining Anxiety by Dr. John Deloney. And he had a statistic in the beginning of the book that said that there are over 40 million adult Americans that suffer with anxiety, and that number is underreported, which clearly it is, because that number would only include, I suppose, people that have gone and gotten medical or professional help for anxiety. So like myself, I wouldn't be in that statistic, right? And there's plenty of people that wouldn't have been, that have never seen anybody professionally for it. 40 million U.S. adults. That's a huge percentage of the population. There's like 330 million people, and that includes women, or not women, that includes children, right? And so, how many adult people there are, maybe, half that many or 2/3 that many or something. So you're talking, 40 million is a big chunk of the population. I talked yesterday, last Sunday, pardon me, how anxiety is nothing new, right? And the whole purpose of the study, one of the purposes, is going to be to show you that people in the Bible suffered with anxiety. But I doubt the number of people that suffered with anxiety in the past equals the number of people that suffer with anxiety today, because of what this verse is talking about, the cares of this world. Most people, and I'm using generalities here, but most people live in a very fast-paced, have a very fast-paced life. They're always running. They're not getting enough sleep. They're not eating right. They're living on caffeine, coffee, Red Bulls, Monsters, energy drinks. There's plenty of people that live on that stuff. Working long hours, consuming the 24-hour news cycle where it's just gloom and doom constantly bombarding them. Social media, right? All of those things, and social media is a great source of anxiety, whether you realize it or not. It is, because you see everybody else with their fake lives on there, and you assume their fake life is real, and you think their life looks a lot better than your life, and what you should realize is they're just as big of a basket case as you are, and their life sucks just as bad as yours does, except they know how to take good, pretty-looking pictures and make everything look wonderful. Their life is no better than yours. But that's a big cause of anxiety. So if you think about the average person, what the average person does, and this isn't everybody, but especially when you're talking like middle-class, professional-type people, they get up with an alarm clock blaring in their ear. So you're immediately startled when you wake up. First thing in the morning, you're startled. The alarm goes off, you jump up out of bed. Didn't used to be like that hundreds of years ago, right? You didn't wake up to an alarm clock blaring in your ear. You're startled. You jump up out of bed, and then it's a race to get up, drink your 2 or 3 cups of coffee, get the kids up, get them fed, get them off to school, and then grab yourself a Red Bull as you're walking out the door, jump in the car and drive a half an hour or 45 minutes through rush hour traffic on the interstate, 80 miles an hour, weaving in and out of cars, get to the city, stop and go. You're listening to Rush Limbaugh as you're driving down the road, hearing all the gloom and doom the whole time. When you stop at the red light, you pull out your phone and you're scrolling through your social media feed to look at how your life sucks and everybody else's is wonderful, and more gloom and doom. Then you finally get to the office and you go up and you've opened your computer and you've got 200 unread emails, you've got 20 meeting requests, and your whole schedule's already booked out, and you're totally already stressed, and somebody's stopping by your office, somebody's stopping by your desk, asking you a bunch of questions, and you run by the break room and you grab a Pop-Tart or some garbage to eat, and you grab another cup of coffee, and the whole day's like that. And then you fight rush hour traffic coming home, and you come home to a bunch of discontent screaming kids probably because you've been away all day and they've been somewhere. I mean, just to think about the average person's life, it's just chaos. And then as soon as you get home, then it's wolfed down some other garbage that you probably picked up as you stopped by the 7-Eleven on the way home or something because you didn't have enough time to cook, because now we got to get off to the games or the recitals or the whatever, and it's run until 9 o'clock at night, and then it's crash into the bed, and then the alarm clock rings again the next morning. That's not everybody's life, but that describes a lot of people's lives in this country. Is it any wonder that 40 million people have anxiety? I mean, it almost gives me an anxiety attack just thinking about it. Now, that's not the reason why I ended up suffering with anxiety. I actually have a very calm, tranquil, peaceful, boring life. I mean, I probably, if you're going to rank boring lives on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at an 11. I mean, I'm pretty much as boring as it gets. I was just working way too hard, pushing myself too hard. But I didn't have all that crazy, running around stress that a lot of people have. So just imagine, it's not hard to imagine why people would be so stressed out with the lives that we live. And what does it come down to? It comes down to the deceitfulness of riches a lot of times. Why do we have to live like that? It's because we want the big house, the big cars, the big everything. We want all this stuff. And so there's all this pressure to have, the types of jobs which cause that kind of pressure. See, riches can be a source of anxiety. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12. What I want to try to remember in this series is I want to try to address fear and anxiety broadly and not just make it all about my situation, because my situation is just one unique situation, if you will. I guess it's not unique, but it's just one specific instance of this. But everybody's situation is not going to be like mine. But a lot of people suffer with anxiety, and their situation's different. So I want to try to, if I can, broaden out my understanding of this and incorporate things in this study, like I just talked about, that don't really apply to me, but that might apply to other people, whether it's people in this room or just people that might hear this someday, somehow. Anyway, Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12. It says, "The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep." Sleeplessness is one of the symptoms of anxiety. People that have anxiety, they can't sleep. And that's a miserable thing. And that's like a downward spiral, because if you can't sleep because of anxiety, then you're even more tired, and then you're less able to cope with the stresses and less able to cope with the fears that come on, and then it's a downward spiral. I really feel bad for people who can't sleep. That's a terrible thing. But in this case, it's the abundance of the rich that won't suffer him to sleep. Now, whether he's lying awake worrying about his investments, or whether the market's going to crash, that could be. He might not be able to sleep because of that, or worrying about what he should do with it, or whether he just has so much stuff that he can't sleep because, oh man, I got to fix this piece of equipment, I got to work on this house, and I got to do this, and I got, all this stuff. This stuff ends up owning you. You don't end up owning the stuff. It won't suffer him to sleep, so it's a source of anxiety. And that's the thing about wealth, is that it requires a lot of attention to be maintained and to be held on to. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12. Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27 and verse 23. That's why really the best place to be is like what Robinson Crusoe's father told him, if you've ever read that novel, to choose the middle station in life. Choose the simple life. Like the writer of Proverbs 30 said, "Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food which is convenient for me, lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain, or lest I be full and say, 'Who is the Lord?' or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain." It's best to be just in the middle. Because if you have too little, that's stressful. If you don't have enough money to provide for your basic needs, that's a cause of anxiety. But if you have so much abundance or wealth, and it's so much to be concerned with and to take care of, that's also a source of anxiety. If you find the middle road, that simple life, where you have enough, and you got some to spare, and you can enjoy your life, but it's not so much that it's going to overburden you and cause you stress and anxiety, that's the place to be. Proverbs 27, 23 through 24. "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds." In an agrarian society, this is your wealth, right? This is your bank account, in other words, in those days. "For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation." So if you want to hold on to your wealth, well, you got to be diligent to know the state of it. You got to be paying attention to it. If you just put some money in just some stock somewhere and never pay attention to it, well, you may come back 20 years later and find out that you invested in some company named Amazon and now you're a millionaire. Or you might come back and realize you invested in something called WorldCom or whatever Madoff's company was. I can't remember what it was right now. But anyway, and you might check it in 20 years and find out you have nothing. right? So you got to be diligent to know the state of your flocks. Well, that's a source of anxiety. So the deceitfulness of riches can cause cares and concerns. Now, let's go back to Matthew 13 and verse 22. Enron, it wasn't Madoff's company, but Enron was the one I was thinking of that went belly up and everybody lost everything. Matthew 13 and verse 22, I want you to notice here that the cares of this world are likened unto thorns. Now I'm gonna kind of go off on a little rabbit trail, intentionally though. I mean, this is like a planned rabbit trail. And I'm going to make a little case here for something. I can't prove it, okay? But it's interesting. I just want you to think about it. But anyway, Matthew 13 and verse 22. Let's just read the verse again. He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. So here, the care of this world is likened unto thorns. Now, this is interesting. A thorn is a stiff, sharp-pointed, straight or curved, woody process on the stem or other part of a plant, a spine, a prickle. So that's, the natural definition. That's if you find a thorn tree or rose bush or something, that's what that's talking about. But figuratively, of course, how it's being used here, is anything that causes pain, grief, or trouble. Trouble is a synonym of anxiety, as I will get to here in a minute, or several minutes. In various metaphors, similes, and proverbial expressions as a thorn in the flesh. Does that sound familiar to you? Or side, a thorn in the side. A constant affliction, a source of continual grief, trouble, or annoyance. And then this phrase, to be, sit, stand, or walk on thorns, means to be in a painful state of anxiety or suspense. So thorns can figuratively represent anxiety, trouble in your flesh. Now this is the bit of a rabbit that I wanted to go after. Is it possible that care, or anxiety in other words, could have been the Apostle Paul's thorn in the flesh? I'm just going to make a case for this. Of course, I can't prove to you it is. Paul doesn't tell us what the thorn in the flesh is, and for good reason, because he didn't want us to know what it was. And you know why I think that is? And this is what somebody else said to me, and this makes sense. Because there have been probably millions of Christians that have gotten all kinds of comfort out of Paul's words when he said he had a thorn in the flesh. He besought the Lord to take it away. The Lord said, my grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And you can take that passage, and it doesn't matter what you're suffering with, you can get comfort from that passage thinking that I've got a thorn in the flesh like Paul did. The same thing applies to me that applies to Paul. Even we don't know what his thorn in the flesh was. If we knew for sure that his thorn in the flesh was glaucoma or something, or cataracts that he couldn't see well, because people do think that it was his eyes. Some people think that. But if you knew that was his thorn in the flesh for sure, and if he would have told us that, then when you think, well, yeah, he had cataracts and couldn't see, and that would be really hard. All I have is anxiety, or all I have is family problems, or all I have is, I've got, a broken foot or something like that, and at least I can see, right? So you might not be able to identify with him quite as much, but when he doesn't say what it is, and then you can just apply that thorn in the flesh to anything that's giving you trouble, you can get a lot of comfort from that. But I am going to make the case that it could have been anxiety for my own selfish reasons. Why not, right? Let's go to 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 7. I'm not saying it is anxiety. I'm just saying it could have been. And it would easily fit into this passage if it was. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 7. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. So he's given this thorn in the flesh, and it was to keep him from pride. He had been given this amazing revelation. He had been caught up to the third heaven and saw things that he couldn't even utter. He was not allowed to speak of. And because of that, he's given this thorn in the flesh so that he wouldn't be exalted above measure. It was the messenger of Satan. Now, remember, who is Satan likened unto? A roaring lion, walking about, seeking whom he may devour. And what does a roaring lion do but scare and terrify its prey? Remember that? 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. Be vigilant, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. So Satan's, one of his chief tactics is fear. We talked about that either last Sunday or the Sunday before. And he says here that this thorn in the flesh is a messenger of Satan. In other words, it's coming from Satan. Now, Paul certainly dealt with a lot of stressful and fearful situations in his life. Just turn back to the previous chapter. 2 Corinthians 11. Let's start with verse 23 down to verse 29. Paul says, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool, I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure." Stripes are beatings, right? Above measure. He can't even count the amount of times that he's been beaten. Stripes above measure. In prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. You know how stressful it would be and painful to be in prison? I mean, especially to be in a first century Roman prison. I mean, you don't have cable TV in there like they do in prisons these days. I think they have cable anyway. Whatever. Prisons these days would be no fun, but prisons in those days would have been a lot less fun. And deaths oft. You know, he was in near-death situations. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. 39 stripes. You know how bad that would hurt? Being beaten 30, with some type of a rod of some kind or a whip or something. 39 times. 5 different times. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. You read about that in the book of Acts. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. So despairing of his own life, thinking he's going to die. A night and a day have I been in the deep. He might have been floating on a board out there in the ocean. A night and a day in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, all those storms at sea, maybe pirates, who knows what. In perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, all the times he suffered from the Jews. In perils by the heathen, right? The Gentiles did their share also. In perils in the city. In perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren. He had to deal with that too. The stress of being betrayed by people that claim to be with you. In weariness. Imagine how tired the man was. In painfulness, in watchings often. Like staying up, hours during the night, watching, making sure that robbers and criminals aren't coming to rob you. In hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, beside those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is offended, and I burn not? Just imagine all the things that he suffered. Is it possible that this man could not have had PTSD? How could he not have? How could he not have emotional trauma done to him, having suffered all those things? Remember, he was a man. He wasn't some robot. Right? He was just like you and me. And he went through all those things. How could he not have emotional trauma? And he admitted to having fears within himself. Turn to 2 Corinthians 7:5. I'm going to do the second verse first. 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 5. It says, "For when we were come into Macedonia, our flesh had no rest." That's another term for anxiety, restlessness. And I'll get to that one later on in the series. "But we were troubled on every side." There's a second synonym of anxiety, troubled. We'll get to that one maybe yet even this morning. "We were troubled on every side. Without were fightings, within were fears." That's anxiety. He was afraid. And all the things that he suffered and all those trials, he's afraid. He's got fears within. one of the devil's chief tactics, to assault us, is fear. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 3. The more I live, the more I study the Bible, the more I take it literally. Now, I know that there are obviously figurative things in the Bible, but there are many things that over the years that I used to read and take more figuratively. And now, many of them I take literally, because I've experienced some things and I realize, oh, he's probably not speaking figuratively. This is one of them. 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 3. Paul says, "And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling." Now I used to think, well, yeah, I mean, it's probably just kind of a bit of an exaggeration. He was a little bit nervous before he got up to preach or something. Yeah, I felt that before. No, you know what he means when he says, "I was in weakness and in fear and in much trembling"? Exactly what he said. He was literally in fear. He was afraid. He was scared. He was trembling and shaking. Literally. Now, why would that have been? Because he was nervous to preach? Probably not. Probably because maybe he just got, through a shipwreck. He just got through another beating. He just got let out of prison, or who knows what. He had all this emotional trauma. So there's no doubt about it that Paul suffered with fear. And here's something interesting. Notice in this verse, "I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling." So he likens, or he associates, weakness with fear and trembling. Okay? Now if you go back over to 2 Corinthians 12, I want you to notice something here. When he prays to God in 2 Corinthians 12:9, to take away his thorn in the flesh, God replies that his strength is made perfect in what? In weakness. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9. "And he said unto me," he said he besought the Lord thrice there in verse 8, that this thorn in the flesh would depart from me, he says. "And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." All right, he says, "I was with you in weakness and fear and trembling." And God says, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." You see how fear and trembling and anxiety could have been the thorn in the flesh. I'm not saying it absolutely was. I'm just saying it could have been. In connection with this thorn in the flesh and God's strength being made perfect in weakness, Paul wrote that he took pleasure in distresses. Just look down to the next verse, 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 10. Therefore, it says, "Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong." He's weak in distresses. He's weak in fear and trembling. You know what distress is? You know what to distress is? It means to cause pain, suffering, agony, or anxiety to. To afflict, vex, make miserable. He's weak in anxiety, in other words. Being in high-stress situations can cause anxiety attacks later on in time. Sometimes the anxiety attack doesn't come right away. You get worn down over time by overdoing it, and then you have a traumatic event. And then after that, that's, like I said the other day, that's the crack of the traumatic event, is the crack in the dam, and then eventually your body just can't handle it anymore, and then you have an anxiety or a panic attack. And your body is telling you, it's screaming to you that something's wrong. Something has got to change. That's what anxiety is. It's an alarm bell. It's telling your body that something has to change. It's a warning system. So he was in all these high-stress situations. Could they have caused anxiety and fear after that? Of course they could. And anyone who's ever suffered with anxiety knows that it's a major thorn in the flesh. Now, like I said, he could have been referring to something else altogether, but he could have been referring to anxiety also. And I take comfort in that. The only thing that I don't take comfort in is that God didn't take it away. He just gave him grace to bear it. So I hope that part's a little different. I hope he just takes it away, but we'll see. Now, another synonym of anxiety that's used in the Bible is troubled. I'm going to define troubled, and I'm going to define some other words here. And we're going to see that this is indeed a synonym of anxiety. So troubled is the past participle. It could be used as an adjective. It means physically agitated, of the sea, sky, etc. Of the sea, sky, etc. means stormy. Of water, wine, etc. Stirred up as so as to diffuse the sediment, made thick or muddy, turbid. That's the primary definition. You think about the pool of was it Bethesda or Siloam? I forget which the name of it was, where the men would get into it and they would be healed. It said that the angel troubled the water, right? It stirred up the water. That's what this is referring to. But figuratively, it can also refer to that same being stirred up in your mind. It stirs your mind up. It means disturbed. Secondly, it means disturbed, disquieted, disordered, agitated, afflicted. So to be troubled is to be disturbed or disquieted. Let's define disquieted. This is another adjective that the Bible uses. We'll get to this later on in the study. Disquieted means disturbed, rendered uneasy or restless. And restless means deprived of rest, finding no rest, especially uneasy in mind or spirit. Uneasy means not conducing to ease or comfort, productive of physical discomfort, causing mental discomfort or disquietude, unpleasant, disagreeable, characterized by absence of ease or comfort, suggesting or manifesting want, that is, lack of ease in body or mind. And then uneasiness, which would be the noun form of uneasy, the adjective. Uneasiness is discomfort, trouble, or anxiety, as affecting one's circumstances or welfare. Mental discomfort, anxiety, apprehension. So we see here that to be troubled is to be disquieted. To be disquieted is to be uneasy and restless, which is to have mental discomfort and disquietude, to have anxiety, to be stirred up in mind, in other words. And that's a good definition of anxiety, because a lot of people that have anxiety, they have that feeling where they just can't calm themselves down. Their mind is racing and they just can't calm their spirit down. That's what it is to be troubled or disquieted in mind. Now, let me just define anxiety for you again and show you. So I showed you how when you define troubled and some of its definitions, you come to anxiety. Now I'm going to show you when we go backwards, when you define anxiety, you come back to troubled. Anxiety is the quality or state of being anxious, uneasiness, or trouble of mind. There was a semicolon in there. Let me read that correctly. Anxiety is the state or is the quality or state of being anxious. It's uneasiness or trouble of mind about some uncertain event. It's also solicitude and concern. So anxiety is trouble of mind. Being troubled is anxiety. Anxious is troubled or uneasy in mind about some uncertain event, being in painful or disturbing suspense, concerned, solicitous. It's fraught with trouble or solicitude, distressing, worrying. Now that word solicitude came up a couple of times when defining anxiety and when defining anxious. Solicitude means the state of being solicitous or uneasy in mind. Remember, that's what troubled means, right? Uneasy in mind. Disquietude, which is what troubled means. Anxiety, care, concern. And then solicitous means full of care, concern, anxious, apprehensive, disquiet, which is what troubled means. Secondly, it means troubled, anxious, or deeply concerned on some specified account. Now, that was a lot of definitions, but I think that you see here that troubled is a synonym of anxiety. Now, that being the case, the Bible has a lot to say about anxiety, because the Bible has a lot to say about being troubled. So much so that it's going to take me a few weeks to get through the section here on being troubled. And we're going to see all kinds of examples of that, Lord willing. Now, being troubled, according to the Scripture, is being in a state of fear. Let me just show you here the association between being troubled and being fearful or afraid. Let's look at Matthew 14 and verse 26. Matthew 14, 26. This is when Jesus was walking on water. Would have been a frightening experience. It says, "And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, 'It is a spirit,' and they cried out for fear." You see? Troubled, cried out for fear. You see how being troubled is to be afraid? Let's look at another one. Luke 1 and verse 12. So I first demonstrated that troubled is a synonym of anxiety using the dictionary. Now I'm demonstrating that trouble is a synonym of anxiety or fear by using the Bible. Luke 1 and verse 12. Luke 1 and verse 12. It says, "And when Zechariah," that's the father of John the Baptist, "when Zechariah saw him," that is the angel, "he was troubled, and fear fell upon him." Troubled, fear falls upon him. You see how these things are the same thing? Let's look at Luke 24, 37 through 38. Because I want to firmly establish that to be troubled is to be anxious, because when we go on through the rest of this study here, I don't need to keep going back and proving it to you. I want to prove it now, and then it won't be questioned whether the passages we're looking at are referring to anxiety or not. Luke 24, 37 through 38. "But they were terrified." This is when Jesus appeared to them after his resurrection. "But they were terrified and affrighted, and supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said unto them, Why are ye troubled? And why do thoughts arise in your hearts?" Right there you have your definition. What is it to be troubled? To be terrified and affrighted. You see it? Let me give you another one. John 14 and verse 27. John 14, 27. "Jesus said, Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Troubled and afraid. I'll give you one more. 1 Peter 3 and verse 14. 1 Peter 3, 14. "Unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers." And that's not the verse. 3:14. That didn't sound right. 3:14. "And if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled." So there's, 4 or 5 verses that show that troubled is being in a state of fear. And then here's one in Psalm 48, verses 5 through 6, which shows that being troubled can be in a state of painful fear. This would be like an anxiety attack. Psalm 48, verses 5 through 6. "They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away. Fear took hold upon them there, and pain as a woman in travail." Now, I've never given birth to children before, for obvious reasons. But I can just imagine what that would be like when those first contractions come on and those pangs of pregnancy come on, and they come on quickly, I'm told, I think, right? Well, I imagine that could be something like when fear takes hold upon you and an anxiety attack takes hold upon you. Now, maybe the physical pain is probably not as great as pregnancy is. But I think that there's something there, because this is likened unto, being troubled, having fear taking hold upon you, as the pain of a woman in travail in pregnancy. Now, there are many examples of men being troubled or suffering with anxiety, in other words, in the Bible. And we're going to get into some of those. But what I first want to look at is just a couple of examples to show you that no man is exempt from suffering with anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that every person is going to suffer with anxiety, but what I'm saying is nobody's exempt from it. You can't say, well, I'm just an exceedingly strong person. I won't ever suffer with anxiety. If you say that, I can pretty much guarantee you will someday, because God will send that anxiety to you to rebuke your pride. Or you could say, well, my personality type isn't given to suffering with anxiety. Now, there are probably certain personality types that are more given to it than others, but nobody's exempt. And I'm going to give you some examples here, two of them, of two of the most powerful men in the world who suffered with anxiety. The first one was Pharaoh, back in Genesis 41 and verse 8. Genesis 41 and verse 8. If the king of the most powerful nation in the world can have anxiety and be afraid of something, so can you. Genesis 41 and verse 8, And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. This is Pharaoh's spirit here. This is after a dream that he had. And he sent and called for magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. He was troubled. He was anxious, in other words. He was uneasy. Stirred up in mind. Probably couldn't sleep after that. This is what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Same thing. He had a dream. It troubled him, and he couldn't sleep. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 1. Pharaoh was the king of the kingdom of Egypt, which was the most powerful kingdom in the world at that time. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, which was the most powerful empire in the world at this time. So these are the most powerful men on the face of the earth, and they are suffering with anxiety. Daniel 2 and verse 1. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. That's a classic symptom of anxiety. You can't sleep. He was troubled. He was afraid, uneasy in mind. Turn over to Daniel 4 and verse 5. I saw in a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Here again, Nebuchadnezzar, same thing. Different time. I think it's a different time. He's once again troubled by this dream. He can't control the thoughts in his head. The thoughts in his head are running wild, and he's not able to sleep. He's afraid. So like I said, if two of the most powerful kings in the world can suffer with anxiety, then you can too. I want to give you an example of anxiety in a godly man. These two men here, Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, weren't exactly the model of virtue. But David was a man after God's own heart, and David described many of the characteristics of anxiety in Psalm chapter 38. Psalm chapter 38. When I started studying this out and I started coming across passages like this as I was looking up words, and it was just amazing to me. And I just thought, wow, he is describing right here anxiety attacks. It's fascinating. Now, David was troubled because of his sin. It doesn't specifically say this was his sin of adultery. I'm guessing that it was. I'm guessing that this is similar to Psalm 51, where he was talking about that. Now, we know in Psalm 51 that that's what he's referring to. I'm guessing it's probably the same thing, but we don't know for sure. But it was something that David had done wrong, and he's suffering because of that sin. He's being punished for it. But the symptoms of anxiety are the same regardless of the cause. Right? So, in this case, David was being punished, but the things that he's suffering are the same kind of things that people with anxiety suffer, whether they're being punished or not. Let's just read the first 5 verses there. O Lord, rebuke me not in thy wrath, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure. For thine arrows stick fast in me, and thy hand presseth me sore. There is no soundness in my flesh because of thine anger, neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. Restlessness. That's anxiety right there. For mine iniquities have gone over mine head, and as an heavy burden they are too heavy for me. My wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness. So this is why David is in the condition that he's in. But like I said, it doesn't matter why he's in that condition. The things that we're going to look at that happen to him are what happens to people that have anxiety. So let's look at the following things that David experienced as a result of anxiety or being troubled, because we know he is suffering with this based on verse 6, the first clause there. He says, I am troubled. I am troubled. Remember, troubled is in a state of anxiety, uneasiness of mind. So he's anxious. Along with that, he's bowed down. And he went about mourning all the day. In other words, he's in heaviness and he's depressed. The second part of verse 6. I am bowed down greatly. I go mourning all the day. I talked about this before, how along with anxiety comes depression. A lot of times they are connected together. And here he is, pressed down, in heaviness, depressed. He was also feeble, which means weak and broken in spirit. Verse 8. The first part there, he says, I am feeble and sore broken. Remember I told you last Sunday that I was broken after what happened to me? It's a pretty good description, actually. Broken in spirit. He says he's weak, he's feeble, which is weak. And that's another thing that anxiety will cause, is it will cause you to feel physically weak. Sometimes you just want to go to bed and not get back up. Now, sometimes when you are having bouts of anxiety, you need to go to bed. You need to rest. That's what I did at first. I went to bed the night after I had the first recent anxiety attack anyway. And I slept for like 12 hours or something. I just didn't set the alarm. If I don't set the alarm, who knows how long I sleep. So I set the alarm 7 days a week. I just didn't set the alarm. I slept for 12 hours, and I'm sure I needed it. I needed that rest. When you have anxiety, you need to rest. When you're depressed, though, you don't need to be in bed all day long. That's where people make a mistake. When they get depressed, they go to bed. And that's the worst thing you can do, because what you need to do to get out of depression is occupation. You need to do something. You need to get up and get about and start moving and doing something. When you're anxious, though, sometimes you do need to rest because you have so worn yourself out that your body just can't control the adrenaline bursts and everything that you're getting from this anxious state, and you need to rest. So it depends on what your problem is. Sometimes you need to go to bed. Sometimes you need to get up. It just depends. But anyway, he's feeble here. He's weak. He's broken. His heart was disquieted, which means deprived of quietness or peace or rest. He was anxious, restless, uneasy, there in the second part of Psalm 38:8. I have roared by reason of the disquietness of my heart. Now, once again, a long time ago, I would have thought, oh, he's speaking figuratively. I have roared. I don't think he's speaking figuratively, because I've experienced it. Now, I didn't experience it with this latest bout of anxiety. And I'm not going to tell you when it was, and don't even try to guess, because you wouldn't guess in a million years. You'd have no idea. Believe me, you would not ever guess in a million years what I'm going to tell you. But I have experienced this roaring by reason of the disquietness of my heart, where I mourned so hard and cried so hard that I literally was roaring like, oh, I just couldn't, and coughing, like uncontrollable coughing, because something was just trying to come out so hard. I think that's what David's talking about. Roaring, literally. I've experienced that. And like I said, don't even try to guess. You will, I promise you, you will not guess. You have no idea. You couldn't guess in a million years. You just never know what people go through. You didn't see me do that, and if I wouldn't have told you, you'd have had no idea. Maybe some of you have done that, and I would have no idea if you didn't tell me either. So you want to give people a break sometimes because you just never know what they're going through. His heart panted, there in verse 10. First part of verse 10, my heart panteth. You know what panting is? Heavy breathing. You know what happens when you have an anxiety attack? Heavy breathing. His strength failed. Mental, physical weakness. Second part there of verse 10, my strength faileth. And then the light of his eyes was gone. In other words, his joy was gone. The concern, fear, and worry were visible on his face. Psalm 38, 10c. 10c, yeah, the third part, anyway. He says, as for the light of mine eyes, it is also gone from me. Let me just do a couple of comparative scriptures to show you what it means that the light of his eyes is gone. It means that his joy is gone and that it's replaced with fear and worry. Now let's look at Proverbs 15 and verse 30. Proverbs 15 and verse 30. The light of the eyes rejoiceth the heart, and a good report maketh the bones fat. See the light of the eyes? David says, the light of mine eyes is gone. But the light of the eyes rejoices the heart. See, the light of the eyes is that joyful spirit that you have, that joyful feeling. But his was gone. He had no joy. Let's look at Psalm 6 and verse 7. Psalm 6 and verse 7. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all mine enemies. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. You see, mine eye is symbolic of his countenance, how he's feeling, right? He doesn't have joy anymore. He's got grief. The light of his eyes is gone. Look at Ezekiel 27 and verse 35. Ezekiel 27, 35. All the inhabitants of the isles shall be astonished at thee, and their kings shall be sore afraid. They shall be troubled in their countenance. You see it in their face. You can see it in somebody's face when they're troubled, when they're afraid, when they're scared, or when they're depressed. You can see it in their eyes. You know, the eye is the window to the soul. I've seen people, I know, I've seen this where I can see depression on somebody's eyelids. Sometimes the way that their eyelids look. It's weird. You say that's strange, but I'm telling you. I can look at some, not everybody, but some people, I can look at their eyelids and tell they're depressed. It's kind of strange. One more, Daniel 7 and verse 28. You can even tell when somebody's sick by looking in their eyes. I remember Austin came to church one time, and I looked at him, and I didn't say anything, but I thought, man, he looks like something's wrong. He had like these real dark red under his eyes. He went home that afternoon and was puking his guts out. I didn't find out about it until a day or so later, but I could just look in his eyes and see he was sick. And he didn't know he was sick, and I didn't know he was sick, but I knew something was wrong just looking at his eyes. I wasn't surprised to find out what happened. Daniel 7 and verse 28. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations, that's a big word for thoughts, my cogitations troubled me, there's anxiety, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. You see, if you would have looked at his face, you could have told that there was something wrong. He didn't tell anybody. He keeps it to himself. But his countenance was changed. The light of his eye, in other words. Right? So when David says the light of my eye is gone, he's talking about his joy gone, and it's replaced with fear, worry, and anxiety, which is visible on his face. All right, let me get one more here, because the next section I think is going to take the whole sermon, so I don't want to break that up in the middle. Another example of anxiety in the Bible were Joseph's brothers, the patriarchs, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob. They sold their brother into slavery. You remember that? Well, as time transpired, and the brother they sold into slavery ended up becoming the prime minister of Egypt, and then the drought came in the land, and they came to get the food, and then eventually Joseph reveals himself to them, and they realize, whoa, little brother that we just threw in the pit and then sold to the Ishmaelites and all that, and told our dad he was dead. He's the king essentially that we're standing in front of. You think they might have been just a little apprehensive, maybe a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of jitteriness, a little afraid maybe. Genesis 45 and verse 3. Genesis 45 and verse 3. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. These guys were having an anxiety attack, probably. Like, oh boy. They were blessed that their brother was of better character than they were, because otherwise he would have taken vengeance on them, but he didn't. But they were so troubled that they couldn't even speak. And this can happen. When you get in a severe state of anxiety, you have a hard time speaking. I got a verse for you in Psalm 77 and verse 4. Now, I will, Lord willing, get back to Psalm 77 later on in this study, because this is another example of an anxiety attack. But I just want to get one verse from it right now. Psalm 77 and verse 4 says, Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. So troubled, so anxious, so full of fear and concern and worry. So uneasy that I can't even speak, he says. Now, sometimes talking about what is worrying oneself with a wise and trusted person can help to allay one's fears. I'll get into this, Lord willing, at the end of this series when I talk about what you can do to address and to get over anxiety. And sometimes that is talking to somebody else. Now, that could be a professional counselor or somebody, or it could just be a family member, a friend, a pastor, just somebody that you can talk to about your fears. Now, the thing is, you have to find somebody that you can trust. Of course, you wouldn't want to tell somebody something that would go blab it all around and spread your information. But you also want to find somebody who can handle having your heart poured out to him. Because many people can't. Many people cannot handle having another person pour their heart out to them. It's just too much for them. They just don't do well with the emotion. Some people will just get uncomfortable. They'll want to leave the conversation or change the subject. And this is very disheartening for a person who is, whether it's depressed or anxious or just has some problem in their life, and you want to talk to somebody and you start to open up to somebody, and you can just tell by the look on their face, I don't want to talk. I don't like emotion. I don't want to talk about this. And they excuse themselves, or they change the subject or something. You got to find somebody who is willing and able to talk to you, who will listen with a listening ear, with empathy. And that's, not everybody's like that. So you got to find the right person. Let me just give you a word to the wise here. If somebody is opening up to you, it's because he wants to. If somebody is opening up to you, it's because he wants to. So the mistake you never want to make, and I've seen this happen, I've had it happen to me, is that if somebody's opening up to you, don't respond back, oh, we don't need to talk about this. Oh, you don't need to tell me about this. If the person's opening up to you, he wants to tell you about it. And you saying, oh, no, you don't need to tell me about that. This is too painful for you. It's too emotional for you. Or this is none of my business or whatever. People will do that. Somebody starts to open up and they say, oh, no, you don't need to talk about that. That's the worst thing you can possibly do when somebody's opening up to you, is tell them, oh, no, you don't need to talk about that. Don't assume that talking about it will make the person sad and worse off. That person's opening up to you because he wants to. Remember that. So it can help when you are suffering with anxiety to find a wise and trusted person to talk to. Sometimes they can just talk some sense into you. Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to. You just need somebody to listen to. But sometimes as you explain your fears to this person as an outsider who's not suffering with anxiety, and they can hear these fears and they can say, I understand that you're afraid, but really, let's think about this. There's nothing to be afraid of. And they can talk some sense into you. My wife did that for me here a couple of weeks ago. Very helpful. Now, there's a time to keep silence and there's a time to speak. So when you are able to speak, find someone who will be able to listen to you, that you'll be able to talk to, that'll be helpful for you. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 7. This will be the last verse I have for you. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 7. Now, sometimes there's a time to keep quiet too. Sometimes you just need some time to process things internally, but there's also a time to speak. Ecclesiastes 3:7, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. There's a time to speak. And if you happen to be that person on the other end of it, if you can, listen. Because that happened to me one time. I wanted to open up. I wanted to tell somebody something I was struggling with. I don't remember the particular thing. I remember the response. I don't remember the thing. And as soon as I started to tell the person, then the person says, oh, no, you don't have to tell me this. And I just kind of stopped. But I thought, I wanted to tell you that. I needed to tell somebody that. And, being shut down like that. And I know the person was well-meaning, well-intentioned. But don't ever do that to somebody. Listen to them, hear them out, because they need to talk to you if they're trying to. All right, that's all I have for today. Next time we're going to continue looking at being troubled, and we're going to see several other biblical examples of such. And as we go through some of these lessons, we're going to pick up little tidbits here of the nature of anxiety and then what to do about it and how to deal with it, Lord willing. So thank you for your kind and patient attention this morning. Just a quick note at the end of the sermon. The most important thing a believer in Jesus Christ can do is to be a member of one of God's true churches. If you're not already a member of one, go to pastorwagner.com/churches to see if there is a true church or other believers of like faith near you. That's pastorwagner.com/churches.